As if being beautiful wasn't enough. Studies show that beautiful people have tons of advantages in our society. It's easier for beautiful people to persuade someone to do what they want. If they're in politics, they have an advantage. And if they're an executive, studies show that beautiful people have greater sales than, non-beautiful people.
People always say, don't judge a book by its cover. And yet, as humans, we can't seem to do that.
We will explore the tie between our external appearance and our internal worth through a lens of Jesus' message of universal human dignity.
Hello, and welcome to Story to Light, a podcast where we discuss Christianity, faith, and the arts. This is a production of LaSalle Catholic College Prep. My name is Ting.
And I'm Brigid. On today's episode, we will be talking about the 1996 Disney animated film, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, by looking at the treatment of Quasimodo because of his physical differences and how this exemplifies our human tendency to prejudice.
Our guests today will be fellow podmakers Owen and Jason, who also have an episode of Story to Light, also about the Hunchback, which you can listen to after ours.
As part of our podcast, we just want to alert you that we are going to reveal some spoilers about this movie, so be prepared for that. And if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to be spoiled, just stop listening now.
The Hunchback of Notre Dame opens with a gypsy woman running away from a madman on a horse. The madman is Frollo, the Minister of Justice of Paris, and he is on a mission to eliminate all sin, and that includes eliminating the gypsies who he sees as a symbol of sin.
The gypsy woman is holding a baby swaddled in cloth. This baby will be the protagonist of our story, whose name is Quasimodo. Quasimodo has a physical deformity that gives him a hump, which is why the movie is called The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and other physical traits that are abnormal. When Frollo sees Quasimodo for the first time, Frollo believes that Quasimodo is a, quote, unholy demon, and he immediately tries to drop Quasimodo down a well, but is only stopped by a priest from the Church of Notre Dame.
The priest convinces Frollo to not kill the baby and to keep the baby as his own. However, Frollo's condition to this is that Quasimodo must be kept in the bell tower of Notre Dame, never to go outside, into the outside world.
The action of the movie starts when Quasimodo is about 20 years old, and every year in Paris there is a festival called the Feast of Fools. Quasimodo loves watching the Feast of Fools because though he can never join in, it's full of fun activities like gypsies and jugglers and color and light, and it's a festival that doesn't normally exist in Paris because, as we said, Frollo is very against the gypsies.
But this year, Quasimodo decides to go to the Festival of Fools against his master's wishes, and there he meets the beautiful gypsy Esmeralda. And Esmeralda drags him into a competition to become the King of Fools. But during this competition, the people see that his ugliness is not a mask, but rather his true form, and they begin to throw things and discriminate against Quasimodo.
Esmeralda is able to stop the attack and run away from the guards that are chasing her into the Church of Notre Dame, where she can claim sanctuary as it is a holy place. Here she meets the captain of the guard, Phoebus, who is a good man that does not agree with Frollo's practices and only wants to help her.
Within the church, Esmeralda meets Quasimodo once again, and they get to know each other, and Quasimodo, who is in awe of her beauty and kindness, helps her escape. But once Frollo realizes that Esmeralda has escaped the Church of Notre Dame, he starts burning the city of Paris in a crazy effort to try and find her.
Phoebus and Quasimodo must work together throughout the movie to save Esmeralda. Along the way, Quasimodo falls in love with Esmeralda, but Esmeralda falls in love with Phoebus.
During the climax of the film, Quasimodo dramatically saves Esmeralda from burning at the stake in front of a large crowd and brings her back into the church of Notre Dame. Frollo then decides to attack the church in order to get Esmeralda, and at this moment, Phoebus starts to revolt against Frollo.
In his final attempt to capture Esmeralda, Frollo falls from the cathedral of Notre Dame and dies, and Quasimodo and Phoebus are regarded as heroes for saving the people of Paris and Esmeralda. At the end of the movie, Quasimodo screams at Frollo, "No, you listen. All my life you have told me that the world is a dark, cruel place. But now I see that the only thing dark and cruel about it is people like you." The movie portrays Frollo as this extreme character who really discriminates and abuses Quasimodo for how he looks. Frollo tries to throw him in a well when he's a baby. He teaches him the alphabet with A as the word abomination. Frollo is depicted as this extreme example, but how extreme is he really?
Right. We see a lot of judgment just based on looks in our society today, and it's just Frollo really isn't that extreme. I mean, obviously he's much more open about his judgments, and his treatment is is more extreme than you would see today. But a lot of people hold these kind of sentiments, and they say things and do things that reflect what Frollo did to Quasimodo.
We want to start by talking about a scene in the movie called The King of Fools. So we briefly mentioned this in the summary, but what happens in this scene is that Quasimodo comes to the Feast of Fools, and they're crowning the ugliest at this festival. And Esmeralda drags Quasimodo up onto the stage, and everyone votes him the ugliest, and she tries to remove his mask, and it doesn't come off.
And this causes the crowd to go into an uproar, and they start throwing things and yelling things at Quasimodo, which are judgmental and very, very hurtful. And they don't reflect the kind of love that Jesus would want us to have in his upside-down kingdom. Moral Toolbox of Virtues defines love as something that affirms the reality of the other person, that takes the trouble to get to know the other person or culture, and doesn't just look at the surface of who they are.
And so Frollo, as we said, doesn't do this, but neither does anyone in that crowd. No one in that crowd, except for Esmeralda, can affirm Quasimodo's dignity right at the start. I mean, Frollo obviously is extreme, but he's also representative of every single person in that crowd.
So we see this interesting contrast between the beginning and the end of the film, where in the King of Fools scene, Quasimodo is hated, basically, by the crowd. But by the end of the movie, when he saved Notre Dame and he saved Esmeralda, suddenly he is celebrated. And the only thing that's really changed is that Quasimodo has now somehow proven himself.
Yeah, it's this great celebration, happy ending where, everyone loves Quasimodo now, which is wonderful, except it's another example of how the worth of Quasimodo as an ugly person is determined on him doing something extraordinary to make people like him, versus someone like Esmeralda, who is automatically liked by everyone because of how she looks. So while it seems like it's a great ending, we're concerned with the fact that even though Quasimodo, quote-unquote, won, he had to do this incredible act in order to be accepted, the same as everyone else.
And so we have to think about our own lives and how we think about people. And do we look at ugly people who don't look as nice as perhaps we do or other people around us do, And what are our thoughts about them? Do we look down upon them automatically because they look worse?
It's one of the essential flaws of humanity, that we believe that what's inside of us is reflective of what's outside of us. And I think this question comes up a lot with the topics of race, because racism doesn't make any sense. Like, why do we think that some people are inferior to other people based on the color of their skin? It doesn't make sense. We're all the same inside. We all have the same anatomy of our hearts. Like, it doesn't make sense. Yet people historically have always completely based their opinion on someone else because of this skin color. And in modern times, I think that a good example of this idea of having to prove oneself comes with the idea that Black people in America have to be, quote unquote, twice as good and half as Black. There was an article published in The Atlantic called Fear of a Black President, where the author discussed how Barack Obama, as the first Black president, had to avoid the mention of race. And one of the quotations from this article by Cornell Belcher was, "The thing is, a Black man can't be president in America, given the racial aversion and history that's still out there. However, an extraordinarily gifted and talented young man who happens to be Black can be president." So I think this illustrates really well sort of what we're getting at with this question, because showing that you're worthy of the love of people, and it's fine if in the end they love you like they do for Quasimodo, but the fact is that a president who wasn't up against the struggle of racism in America wouldn't have had to be the way that Barack Obama had to be in order to gain acceptance, so to speak.
And people should be allowed to have their imperfections. People should be allowed to make mistakes. And yet, based on this outward appearance, some people believe that like certain groups of people or certain people that look a certain way aren't allowed that right because they think of them as less.
Yeah, like Quasimodo and Frollo, for example. Like, people will immediately assume that Quasimodo, like, they won't want to be around Quasimodo, though Frollo internally is way uglier than Quasimodo, so to speak. And also, if Quasimodo and Frollo were to do the same horrible deed, if they both threw a baby down a well, you can bet that Quasimodo would be more, I would bet that Quasimodo would be more, I guess, revolted against or hated just because of his outward appearance. Definition of some beautiful, according to the four transcendentals, is the result of something acting according to what it is. And this is very different from our definition of beauty in our society, because this has to do with the inside matching the outside, so to speak, but more so the inside. It's about something is beautiful when it acts as it is, or, for example, when Quasimodo is making the wood
dolls.
Figures.
Yeah, the wooden dolls.
That is what the Transcendentals would define as true beauty. And yet, as humans, we can't do that. We think things are beautiful based on how they look.
Right, and it really isn't true. It's more on how do we act as human beings? What are we doing to improve our own lives, other people's lives? How do we treat others? These are the things that will define beauty.
According to the way that God deemed things beautiful. And going along with that, when we talk about Jesus and the kingdom of heaven and the upside down kingdom, there's this whole idea of everyone being able to access the kingdom of heaven equally because of their essential human dignity. And in this movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, it's supposed to be this bringing of the upside down kingdom where even a person like Quasimodo is accepted by everyone. But we really don't see that in this movie. In our opinion, I think the kingdom of heaven would be if Quasimodo came out of the bell tower and people just gave him the benefit of the doubt, or saw that, judged him by his actions, not his appearance.
Right, and they celebrated him even in the beginning, when he had done nothing extraordinary, but he had done nothing wrong either, they still would have celebrated him and seen him as an equal.
One of the other examples we wanted to bring up that is not about Quasimodo, but there's a book written for children called Wonder by R.J. Palacio, and it's about a little boy named August, or Augie, who has a facial deformity, and it's based on a true story, and I'm just going to read the first paragraph of the book, which is, I know I'm not an ordinary 10-year-old kid. I mean, sure, I do ordinary things. I eat ice cream, I ride my bike, I play ball, I have an Xbox. Stuff like that makes me ordinary, I guess. And I feel ordinary, inside. But I know ordinary kids don't make other ordinary kids run away screaming in playgrounds. I know ordinary kids don't get stared at wherever they go. And again, this is another Quasimodo type story where this little boy, who's completely innocent, who, like he says, is into all this stuff other kids are into, is judged so harshly by everyone around him. And in order to make friends, he has to do something to make them want to approach him. And we're just wondering, how can we ever get over this? How can we achieve the upside down kingdom? Because it can be almost an immediate assumption, and it doesn't really make sense.
Right, and I think part of our struggle to be better humans is to recognize that we are making this initial judgment and figure out a way to put that away, to recognize that we are judging them, but we shouldn't judge them until we have seen who they truly are and not just what they are on the outside. All right. We would like to welcome our guests, Owen and Jason, our fellow pod makers.
Hello.
Podcasters.
They're very finicky about their term.
Yeah, anyway,
It's a craft, actually.
I'm regretting this interview.
Okay, well, anyway, we would like to know, our question for you today is, do you think you could ever fall in love with someone who looked like Quasimodo?
Probably not. Hate to break it to you.
I'm gonna have to go with Owen on that one because most relationships start with initial attraction. Like the reason you meet anyone at a bar or a party, because they're attractive. You go up and talk to them for that reason, and also a huge element of having a relationship is a physical component. And but I don't want to have a physical component with Quasimodo.
Yeah, he has too much of a physical component on his back.
Because we're talking about a lot, like how Jesus' upside down kingdom, like we're supposed to judge all people based on their human dignity, and yet we cannot not judge people by their outside appearance, like you said.
I think it's different between like an actual loving, love
yeah,
relationship
exactly. Like
versus a friendship. I'm sure I could have a friendship with someone who looked like Quasimodo. Having a loving relationship, I can't say that. But these are very different relationships. So we can't put them.
And that's because part of having a romantic relationship is the physical aspect.
Right.
If you're not attracted to someone, that's hard.
Like Jason's hot, but I'm not going to date him because we don't have the physical.
We just wouldn't have the
component,
physical chemistry.
Right.
But the friendship works just fine.
Exactly.
Right, but I mean, Quasimodo.
So Quasimodo
Don't
doomed?
blow that off.
That was great.
Is Quasimodo doomed? Never, no one's ever gonna
Right,
love him? Because that's a theme
There's
in the movie.
plenty of other deformed people who were alive during the Middle Ages.
So are deformed people,
Doomed
so to
to be
speak,
together?
always going to have to be together?
No, because these are also our personal responses. I know there's plenty of other people who would have no issue dating someone like that if the connection was good enough. That's
Yeah.
just my personal opinion.
It's just weird, right? That we have to, if it's the best person in the entire world for us, but they look a way that we don't find attractive, then we can't.
But are they the best person if they don't look the way we like? Because
I don't know.
again, it goes back to that physical component.
Because wouldn't in God's kingdom, wouldn't they not be connected? Shouldn't they not be connected?
Sure, but unfortunately, we're human and they are.
Exactly. Yeah, it's
so
weird.
we can't take the human component out of a relationship. They're still.
Yeah, and again, some people can, some people can't. But for me, I would not be able to.
Yeah, neither would I. It's pretty simple.
Okay.
Okay, anyway, thank you, Owen and Jason. All right, to end our podcast today, I think we just want to think about being aware of how our thoughts and our actions are being affected by our judgments. And we want to make sure that the way we treat people isn't based off these superficial judgments that we make about people.
And it's easier said than done, for sure.
All right, thank you for listening to Story to Light with Ting.
And Brigid.
I hope you have a great week. Our intro and outro music are written by Sam Jensen, also known as Sevens. Thank you very much.